Some call it the
Okay.
NFC Beast, some call it the NFC Least. Today, Amir and I are going to be going through and determining which side that this division will land on. We're going to be going through all four teams' off seasons, their schedules, and predicting their records. If you're new to the series, of course, that is what we're doing. But we've already done it for all, six divisions before this. We're closing out on this series here on the channel. But Amir, good morning Thursday, and how you doing today?
Doing good. Doing good. I
Doing
got the
good.
day
I
off
mean,
of
we're
work.
not going to waste any more time. Let's go again. We go in order of how these teams finished in the division last season. And of course, we're going to start with quote unquote America's team. Amir, it's an understatement to say it's going to be a big season for Dallas this season because this offseason, they lost Dan Quinn, Tony Pollard, which he didn't really have the greatest season, and aging, I guess, injury riddled Tyron Smith. So he didn't lose much. But this year, they made a lot of headline noise because they didn't do anything in free agency. And that is because they're in salary cap hell, to put it lightly. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, and some other people are all in need of contract extensions. And this could all be their last year in Dallas. As Jerry Jones has come out and said, it is an all-in year. He said if the players want their big contracts, they're going to have to come out and play like it. But in the draft, they went out there and drafted Tyler Guyton, of course, out of Oklahoma. Solid prospect, but he needs some work. Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. Of course, Cooper Beebe and Marist Liafu. I definitely botched that, but he's kind of like a safety linebacker hybrid. Amir, if you're not familiar, kind of plays like Hufanga from San Fran. Kind of plays like but he was at Notre Dame this past season. But what do you think about the Dallas Cowboys off season? And do you think that they're going to have a better outlook here in 2024?
So, the offseason, was a little underwhelming because, you end up losing your best tackle and also Tony Pollard, which are definitely huge losses. But, you know, honestly, I mean, the biggest concern is the upcoming year, next offseason with, Dak, CeeDee, and Micah. And, me and you kind of talked about it, a couple months ago about, what is Dallas going to do? And me personally, I view Dallas as a team that's going to get to the playoffs every year and, struggle. And I think it's more of a culture thing rather than, them having the talent because they have the talent every year. And so, I believe Dallas is going to, bring at least one of those three back. I mean, because they're way too talented for them to, let them go. But personally, I think Dak is gone. I think it's going to be between CeeDee or Micah. I see Dak going to a place like Miami, like I mentioned a couple months ago. But Dallas, I mean, this is literally the last year to really do something. Once they lose a quarterback, or CeeDee, who I think is the third best receiver in the league, I think it's only going to go from downhill from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you can't let any of these guys go because this is a team that, again, is good enough to get there, but they're not good enough to get over the top when it comes to the postseason, which is when you need your stars to be stars. But no matter what, if it's the defense letting them down or Dak Prescott hasn't showed up in this Dak Prescott era, they haven't been able to get, I guess, even past the second round of the playoffs. They haven't been past the second round of the playoffs since the 90s. For such a storied franchise, that's not something you want to see. But interesting year in Dallas here. Interesting to see what they do with Dak. I do think they pay Dak because last time when he was up for contract, they waited to the last moment to pay him, and they had to pay a lot more than they needed to. But let's just say that he's going to get more than Trevor Lawrence is what I'm getting at. But let's get into their schedule predictions here. Of course, I'll start off here with all these teams, and that is a bit of a spoiler there. But I think they do get off to a hot start in Tom Brady's debut game here on Sunday, midday Sunday football. I think they do beat the Browns. Of course, the Browns don't have a great track history of week ones. I think Dallas can come out against a prove-it year. They have a lot more to prove than Cleveland this year, in my opinion. I think they get out to a win there. They beat New Orleans, who I'm not a big fan of this year. We saw that last week when we predicted the schedules or 2 weeks ago. And then I do think they lose to Baltimore. I think Dallas has, the last 2 years, really, they've struggled to beat quality teams that are above 500, just like Miami. And I don't really think that's going to change much this year because Dallas didn't make any changes. They've only lost this offseason. But I do think you could go into the bye week on Thursday night and Sunday Night Football, beating the Giants, Pittsburgh, and your first quality wins come against Pittsburgh and Detroit, and of course Cleveland as well. So again, last year you struggled beating quality teams, but you beat 3 to 4 quality teams here before your bye week. So I think if you're Dallas, you're really, all these players are really motivated to make this last year worth it. But here's the big wins. To me, again, this might be controversial, and I understand you're probably going to go differ. But I think these are the big wins. I think Dallas can go in and they can beat San Fran. They can beat Atlanta. Let me clarify, I'm a Browns fan. I have no hatred towards Dallas, but this is the point in the season. At the midseason mark, you're going to be 7-1. Dallas fans are going to be on top of the world. They're going to be leading their division on top of the NFC, and we're going to be like, this Dallas team might actually be able to do it. This is what they do every single season, Amir. They get our hopes up. We really believe last year for 1 or 2 weeks you had them as the number one team in football, and then they went down your rankings and down your rankings, and just for me as well, they do this every single year. I think they continue that. They go 8-1 against Philadelphia, and they're 8-1. Texas matchup against the Houston Texans. You lose that one on Monday Night Football, and that game is going to take a lot out of you because now you go into a stretch run where a lot of teams where they're kind of in the middle of the pack. You have some contenders like Cincy and Philly, but outside of that, a lot of teams that are in the middle of the pack. And I think you start to, not play as hard as you were early in the season because it took a lot to get a lot of those big wins early on. You just go on a trend. You win, loss, loss, win, loss, loss, win, loss. And I think you can finish out the season 11-6. It's what they do. They go 10-5, or excuse me, 10-7, 11-6 now. That's just what Dallas does. I think they make the playoffs, but nothing more. They'd probably a first or second round exit in this last dance, I guess, if you want to say, for the Dallas Cowboys. But Amir, how do they fare in your schedule?
So to start that season off for Dallas, even though the Browns have a bad track record at home, I think this year is different. I believe that this year, more than recent years, the Browns are actually ready to build off momentum. I think in past years, the Browns kind of went in, to the season kind of questioning what they have, kind of questioning their skill set. But I think last year, dealing with all the injuries, the fact that Nick Chubb's coming back, Deshaun's coming back, the fact that Schwartz is coming back, and we actually have some more pieces, coaching wise, Dorsey, Mike Vrabel, those type of guys. I think that we're actually ready to somewhat build off of what happened last year, and so. And, especially with us being good at home, I think we beat Dallas at home. Dallas loses to us, week one. They go ahead and beat the New Orleans team that's obviously going to be struggling. They lose against Dallas. Go to New York, beat New York, and go to Pittsburgh, beat Pittsburgh in a tough game. And I think week 6 this year, it's going to be different than last year how Detroit, went to Dallas. And, it came down to the wire. Some people, might argue that, Detroit should have won that game. I think it's going to be different this year. I think Detroit's ready to, kind of set that tone back in the NFC, end up beating Dallas, in Detroit. And so, the bye week, week 7, it's crazy how, a couple of years ago, a week 7 bye week isn't the worst thing in the world. But the fact that, this year, you got a week 7 bye week, and, you got all these games after that. I mean, it's going to be tough for them. And so, I had them, for the first game out of the bye week, losing to San Fran at San Fran. And, I kind of think that this is going to be similar to last year. You beat up on little teams. You might end up sweeping Washington and end up sweeping, the Giants in your division. But you play against a team like San Fran and get completely ran off the table. And so I have them going to Atlanta, beating Atlanta. After that, in week 10, I have them surprisingly beating Philly in that first game. And then I had them losing to Houston at home. I had them going to Washington, beating Washington, and then beating the Giants at home to end up sweeping them. I had them losing against Cincinnati at home. I had them going to Carolina, winning that, beating Tampa Bay. And then, that second matchup against Philly, I had them actually losing against Philly. And then, that week 18 game, I would say they're going to go ahead and rest. But at this point, I want to say they're like 10-6 right now, kind of fighting for that playoff positioning, or, 9-7 or whatever it may be. And so I have them at the 9-6, and so I have them winning that last game of the season.
Absolutely. For the Eagles, of course, I'm pretty high on them this season, but they did lose some franchise cornerstones, I guess I'll say. Some guys that have been there, and they're probably going to get their jerseys retired. Guys like Jason Kelsey, fan favorite, but Fletcher Cox as well. Those are both guys that are going to be in the same retirement Hall of Fame class, first ballot Hall of Famers in my eyes, right? But they did have a good offseason. This is a team that arguably had the best offseason out of every single team in the NFL, Amir. They signed Saquon Barkley. Shock, right? He stayed in division, and he went to the Giants' biggest rival, the Philadelphia Eagles. He's now in the best situation of his career. They bring back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They extended their receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and also Landon Dickerson, of course, an all-pro member last season. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, two guys that fell into their laps, and two guys that are going to be able to play multiple positions on this defense, just like C.J. Gardner-Johnson and some other guys that they already have in that secondary. They brought in Kellen Moore to fix this offense. Vic Fangio, who has revolutionized defense, he's coming in to fix this Eagles defense. Of course, he made the Fangio 6 defense very popular over the last couple of years, and everybody's been copying it. Oh, and if all of this wasn't enough good for the Philadelphia Eagles, they traded away an aging, a frustrated Hassan Reddick, who is in need of a contract extension at 30 years old, for basically the same player, but 6 years younger in Bryce Huff, guy who has a lot of similar production from the Jets. Eagles, A-plus offseason. I don't think you can get much better than this. But your thoughts about the Eagles this offseason?
I believe they had one of the greatest off seasons this year, and you end up losing Kelsey, which is their huge loss, and I think them losing Fletcher Cox. Even though he was still playing on a good level, it was honestly about time for them to retire. And I kind of think that there was someone preparing for that. Loading up their D line, loading up that front line, with young talent. And like you mentioned, I mean, trading Hassan Reddick for a basically the same player but younger was huge. You go ahead and bring in Saquon, and then the biggest concern was that secondary. You go ahead and address the secondary not only in the draft, but you bring in CJ. And the Eagles honestly still have some good young secondary pieces that they can really develop. I mean, you have exactly like you got a guy like Eli Ricks who you can develop a solid corner who can play in the slot. You got Sidney Brown who can also develop. And so you go ahead and bring in two guys from the draft that were some people argue the two best DBs in the draft.
Yeah,
and so you also bring in one of the best defensive minds in football, to be your D coordinator. And so I think undoubtedly the Eagles won this offseason.
Yeah, I don't think you can get much better than what they had. But Eagles, they continue to set history here as they're going to be the first ever team, along with the Green Bay Packers, to play a game in Brazil. And that's going to take place on Friday, of course, the day after the first game of the season, to kick off the season in week 1. I think that the Eagles can go in there with this new revamped look here for the Eagles, and I think they can beat the Green Bay Packers. I love Green Bay. I love Jordan Love, but they're not ready for the Philadelphia Eagles, especially if they can play like they did 2 years ago. They start off with a win there. They beat Atlanta, beat New Orleans, and I'll say they lose to Tampa Bay. Now, if you want to have them winning this game for the revenge factor from last wild card, I can see that happening. But regardless, I think 3-1 is a great start for them. And again, I should throw this out there. We had a comment on the last prediction video here. Take these predictions with a grain of salt. Really just look at what their record is at the end of the day, not exactly how they get their record, because a lot of injuries can happen, trades can happen, fall-offs, etc. So just take these predictions with a grain of salt and look at the records that we give each team. Coming out of the bye week, though, I think you beat Cleveland, you can beat the Giants, and then you can lose 2 close games there to Cincinnati and Jacksonville. So at the midseason mark, you're 5-3. I think you're pretty happy if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. You could split the first month of the second half of the season against quality. You lose the quality teams like Baltimore and Dallas, but you get a big win there against the LA Rams. Amir, you're repping the LA Rams today. Not sure what that's about, but outside of that, I think you can close off the season pretty hot, beating Carolina, Pittsburgh, Washington, Dallas. And whether if you're resting your stars or not, I think Philly has enough depth to knock off the New York Giants late in the season. I think this is not their floor, but I think this is definitely in the middle. I could see them going, as crazy as it sounds, I could see this team being a 14-3 ball club. I have them losing some games to Jacksonville, a team that they can easily beat. Tampa Bay, another team they can easily beat. I can see this team being 14-3, but I can also see them being like a 10-7, 11-6 kind of ball club. I'll say this is in the middle at a 12-5 record. But your predictions here, Amir?
I'd say that this team has a quality schedule set up, but the biggest concern is that bye week at week 5. I mean, you got to rally off huge. All those games after that. And honestly, I mean, their biggest competitor this year is going to be staying healthy, and so have them rallying off 4 straight wins. Going into the bye week, feeling smooth. I have them playing against Cleveland, beating them at home. Beating New York at New York, and I have them finally losing their first game in Cincinnati on Sunday Night Football.
Second best player in the league, Joe Burrow.
Against the whatever. I have them playing Jacksonville on Sunday Night Football, beating them. After that, I have them going to Dallas. End up losing to Dallas in that first matchup. Beating Washington. I have them losing 2 straight. At this point, they might be kind of banged up. Sort of still kind of find their groove against really good teams. So I have them losing 2 straight against the Rams and Baltimore. After that, rallying off 4 straight wins, and then that Week 18 game. I think at this point, Detroit's probably going to have that first seed locked up. So at this one, they're probably just going to rest their starters and end up losing to the Giants, finishing 12-5.
12-5 record for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that was yeah, I mean, yeah, Philadelphia Eagles at 12-5. We both have them at the same record, ironically, and I'll have to fix a little hiccup there on the slides later in the show. I was expecting you to have them one win better. But let's talk about their division rivals, the Men in Blue. Of course, we're both repping blue today. No coordination was there, but the New York Giants. Well, let's just say that they had an interesting offseason. Darren Waller decided to pursue music after his divorce, and he ended up retiring from the game of football. Still, and I'll say this, congratulations on your retirement, Darren Waller. One of the most exciting tight ends, especially his skill set when he was on the field. And of course, he wasn't having his issues off the field. One of the most talented tight ends we've seen really ever. But again, the production was not always there with Darren Waller. They lost Saquon Barkley. Of course, they decided not to try and pay him what he wanted, and Saquon Barkley eventually walked. Now, this is where I think they're big winners. Of course, you traded for Brian Burns, one of the most underrated edge rushers in the game, and you traded for him for dirt cheap. So you traded for Brian Burns. He's going to immediately add, he's going to make this defensive line so much better. And then you extended Dexter Lawrence, maybe the best interior defensive lineman in the game after Aaron Donald retired. And this is also where I think they're big winners. You drafted Malik Nabers at 6. You gave this offense finally their go-to X-receiver, and he joins guys like Wan'Dale Robinson. He joins guys like Jalen Hyatt, the guys that are really interesting and young wide receiver prospects. I love Wan'Dale Robinson. But then you bring in Tyler Newman, probably the best safety in the class outside of Cameron Kinchins. And then Theo Johnson out of Penn State. Amir, I'm not going to say this guy's going to be Jimmy Graham, but if you look at their intangibles, like their measurements, he has the exact measurements as Jimmy Graham. It's freaky. It's one of those weird coincidences. But he tested the same exact. He has the same height, weight, everything as Jimmy Graham. Also a basketball background as Jimmy Graham. So again, very weird coincidence there. But this year, no doubt about it, their head coach and quarterback, the two most important positions on any football team, they're both on the hot seat this season. Amir, your thoughts about the offseason for the Giants? I think they had some really high highs. Maybe not really low lows, but your thoughts.
So, I thought, for the stuff that happened, as far as, Saquon stuff and, Darren Waller retiring, I thought their offseason was pretty productive. And the fact that, you also kind of boost up that D-line a little more. I think you have some pieces to work with. Obviously, the huge concern is, the quarterback situation. Personally, I think Daniel Jones is gone after this year. I think what they're going to do is, just try to ride out this last year. If they're competitive, good. If not, whatever, next year's draft, has some decent quarterback talent coming in. And so, I think that especially you get a guy like Malik Nabers, and like you mentioned, you got Robinson at receiver still, Jalen Hyatt, who still has a solid ceiling. And so, I think this team has some pieces to work with overall.
Yeah, I think it all depends on how good is Daniel Jones going to be. If he can stay healthy,
Right.
how good can he be? Is he going to be worth that contract? I think we already have our answer, but maybe he can change our minds this upcoming season. Let's get into their schedule, though. First month of the season, week 1, and I think this is where, Brian Burns is going to have an immediate impact. And some people would say this team is going to be a 2-win football team. Some would say they can make a playoff push. And I'll tell you why. It's because they have Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns. It's not because of this offense. It's not the rest of the defense. It's those two guys on that defensive front that make this team so interesting on a week-to-week basis. But I think they could beat Minnesota, even though Minnesota has such a underrated top 5 offensive line. Whether if it's Sam Darnold, I'm going to take my chances that this Giants defense as a whole can get the better of Sam Darnold. They can beat Washington, whether if it's Jaden Daniels, and we'll talk about that in a moment, or Marcus Mariota. Especially if it's Marcus Mariota. Give me the Giants there in week 2. But I do think you're just not there yet to beat a team like Cleveland or Dallas. You could beat Seattle, but after that, you face some quality teams here like Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. And in week 9, if Jaden Daniels isn't the day 1 starter, by this point, he's going to be the starter. And I think his dynamic, his ability with his legs, I think could create a problem for that defensive front. And I'll have them splitting. Again, it's divisional play. NFL is weird. I think they could beat Carolina. They improved their offensive line, but not enough for this New York front. At the bye week, you're 4-6, and now we head into the big stretch, the last stretch of the season. Can you make that playoff push? This is where you decide, is Daniel Jones our quarterback? Well, I think we get our answer pretty quickly here. You lose 5 of your last 7 games, And that's just going to be the nail in the coffin for Daniel Jones's starting career here in the NFL. And I think you're going to be quickly looking to trade up for a guy like Shador Sanders or Carson Beck. You finish with a record of 6-11.
So with this Giants team, I have them starting the year off losing to Minnesota. I think it'll be a tough game. And like you mentioned, Minnesota has a great offensive line, and so I think start the year off, it'll somewhat be a good wake up game, for this team. And so I have them losing the game in a tough one. Next week I have them beating Washington. And then like you just mentioned, really, they honestly don't have a chance against Cleveland or Dallas, so I have them dropping those two games.
Oh, geez.
After that, after that, losing all these games. And I think at this point, the Giants are going to be a good one-win football team. If that makes sense. Like every game's going to be competitive. Exactly. And so, after that, for the second half of the year, have them going to Carolina, beating Carolina. At this point, going into the bye week at 2-8. And so, after that, I have them losing against Tampa Bay in the tough one. Going to Dallas to beat Dallas, or lose against Dallas again. Lose both those games. Beating New Orleans, who I think is going to be one of the worst teams in the league as well. And I had them dropping those next 3 games and then beating Philly in that Week 18 game.
Yeah, 4-13 record is rough for the Giants. I think they were 5-12 this year, so I have them 1 win better. You have 1 win worse. Again, they lost Saquon, and I think that defense is going to carry them to a lot of close games, like you mentioned. I just don't know if they have the quarterback to take them over the top there in a lot of those late game situations, and that's why this team could be an 8-win football team if they had a better quarterback. But that's going to be the reason why they're 6-11 and 4-13 here in our rankings. The last team here, we'll spend more time talking about their offseason than their actual schedule, because to keep it frank, well, we probably just there's not a lot of upside there this year for the Washington Commanders. But they hired a new coach. Okay, of course they went out there, got Dan Quinn, and unfortunately, Dan Quinn, he was in Atlanta for a lot of years, built that franchise up. They became legitimate contenders for about 5 years or so with Matt Ryan at the helm. But the biggest memory from Dan Quinn's coaching career was that 28-3 loss in the Super Bowl to the New England Patriots. And of course, he hasn't really been the same here. He wasn't the same after, and now he's getting his second opportunity as a head coach here for the young and fun Washington Commanders. But this offseason, they made it a point to bring in some veterans for a lot of this young core. They bring in guys like Bobby Wagner, who's still a tackling machine. He's up there. I think he was number 2 in the league in tackles last year, to Zaire Franklin, who's extremely underrated there for Indy. You bring in Austin Eckler, you bring in Marcus Mariota, whether if he's the day 1 starter or not, we'll get into that in a moment. For the drafted, you drafted Jaden Daniels. Of course, you had the number 2 overall pick. And I'll say this, I think Washington had a very great draft. Of course, you bring in Jaden Daniels, who they believe is the best quarterback in the class. Johnny Newton, to me, best interior defensive lineman. Amir, he's going to be someone fun to watch. Mike Sinistro, I can never say his last name, but out of Michigan, solid corner there. Yeah, you'll have to correct me there. And then Ben Sinnott, out of Kansas State. This is a guy that, if you're not familiar, plays like Kyle Juszczyk. He's a fullback, but he can play tight end. He can slide out to the receiver. He can handle the ball. He's a utility guy on offense, kind of like a Taysom Hill, Kyle Juszczyk kind of a player. But I keep bringing it up around Jaden Daniels. All reports say that in OTAs at the moment, Amir, that Jaden Daniels is getting the first team reps. And that worries me a little bit, because this team is not ready to compete. They're not a great football team, but he's getting the first team reps. And as of right now, it looks like he's going to be the day 1 starter. But if Marcus Mariota is going to be the starter, I guess I'll ask you that. If you're the Commanders, would you rather start the young rookie from day 1, or would you rather have Marcus Mariota start from day 1 and have Jaden Daniels take over late in the season if need be?
If I'm Washington, seeing the structure of the roster, the biggest concern and the biggest thing you don't want to do is ruin your young quarterback's confidence. And seeing Washington with this struggling offensive line like last year, seeing how Sam Howell was the most sacked quarterback in the league, I think going into this year, you got to really take care of your quarterback. And so if I'm them, I start Mariota at first, and then eventually, give that spot to Jaden Daniels. Once Mariota sort of plays out of that spot.
Even if it's just for a month, I think that's been the proven strategy that has worked. And especially if you don't think you're going to be a playoff team this year, why not just play Mariota for half the season? Have Jaden Daniels learn, and then when he's ready, take over second half of the year. It's just a strategy that has been proven to work time after time. It works more so than just throwing your rookie out there from day one. Only special talents like Andrew Luck and Cam Newton have really succeeded from day number one as the starter. Even CJ Stroud didn't even start last year. Bryce Young started from day one, and we saw how that really ended for him in his season. Just a couple examples there. But my last question for you is, let's say you do start Mariota for half the season. And let's say, according to our predictions here, they're going to be a bad football team. What would you do if you're the Washington GM with a guy like Terry McLaurin? Would you go out there? Would you trade him? Because you can get probably a first round pick for him, even if it's a late first round pick. Or would you just hold on to him and hope that he would like to re-sign here in 2 years?
In my opinion, at this point, I think Terry McLaurin is great, but personally, I'd rather trade him for some draft capital and sort of build on his Washington team because even if he does play great, he's probably going to want to demand, wide receiver one money, like what receivers for the top of the league. And so I think at this point, kind of invest in your future, either invest in the O line or invest players to kind of build around Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, we talked about it in our bold predictions video about a month back at this point, which time flies. But I've predicted this all of last season too, so maybe I'm just beating a dead horse. But I think Terry McLaurin will be a Buffalo Bill at some point in time, whether it's this season or in next offseason. They need a true number one, and Terry McLaurin is heavily underrated. He could be Josh Allen's next Stephon Diggs. But I'm not going to go game by game here. You guys can see, I think, at the midseason mark, I'll say week 9. I'm going to hope that Mariota starts at least the first 5 weeks, okay? Or at least the first 6 weeks. Because week 7 against Carolina, it's the worst defense that they have so far in their schedule. And I think if you put Jaden Daniels in there, it's a very winnable game. And I think if he wins that game, of course, it's going to give this team a good confidence boost. So I think if he starts week 7, you can pick up 2 early wins against the Giants and the Carolina Panthers. But after that, I mean, maybe a surprise win against New Orleans or Dallas down the line. But I have them at 5-12. Again, they have a lot of veterans, but I just don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you the same boat. I had them actually losing their first 3 games. Finally playing a team like Arizona and squeezing that one out. And after that, man, I have them losing 4 straight. Beating the Giants to kind of split that divisional matchup. After that, losing 4 straight before the bye week at 2-11 right now, and then finishing the season at 3-14.
Yeah, 3-14. You see the records there. I messed up Philly's record on your end. You had them at 12-5, if I'm not mistaken. So unless I made a typo there, but we definitely went. I'm sorry.
It's at 12-5.
12-5. Okay, so yeah, we both had them at the same 12-5 record. And if you're curious on where we have every team, just stay tuned because what we're going to do is we're going to finish out the AFC and NFC West in the next 2 weeks. And then we're going to either do power rankings where you're going to see exactly where we have every team finishing. We're going to have a lot of fun content after we get through these prediction videos. We do these for a reason because they're fun to look back on and see how wrong or right we were by the season's end. For example, I made a wild prediction last year that Jordan Love was going to go into Arrowhead and beat Patrick Mahomes by 2 scores and throw 300 yards and a couple touchdowns. Weird predictions like that, but it came exactly true. So, again, just fun to look back on. But any last thoughts here, Amir? Of course, we have some plans after this, so I'm excited for those. But any last thoughts before we get out of here?
No last thoughts.
Again, the NFC East, whether if it's going to be the beast or the least, that is yet to be seen. But I forgot to mention this at the top of the show. I guess no better time than now. If you're still here, I know you're going to tune in, so hear me out. The first week of July, so next week, the 1st and the 5th, at 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm going to be hosting a stream on the Bleacher Report app. All you got to do is sign up or download the Bleacher Report app, sign up, and of course, type in the Anomaly Podcast. Of course, the notifications will pop up, and I'm hosting some free agency streams on both Monday and Friday. So come out. More people come out, better I look. But until then, have a great weekend. Stay happy, stay healthy. Get out of here.